these words from the Gospel of Luke. Listen for the word of the Lord. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him. On their way, they entered a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. But they did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. When his disciples James and John saw it, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them. Then they went on to another village. As they were going along the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." To another he said, "Follow me." But he said, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God." Another said, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to those at my home." Jesus said to him, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." Let us pray. Oh God, open our ears that we may hear. Open our eyes that we may see. Open our hearts and our minds that we may understand. Open our hands that we may serve. O God, our rock and redeemer. Amen. Today begins a sermon series that will carry us through the rest of the summer months. And it came about due to some conversations we have been having the past few months in consistory about our slowly but surely shifting from a traditional committee model in and around the church to more of a team model. And we have been talking about the differences between the two. The objection or the question has been raised, well, what is the difference? Isn't it just a name change? What is it beyond that? And so we've been taking some time to clarify for ourselves what we mean, what the differences are in structure and in organization and in function and in purpose between committees and teams. So one of the things that has come up as we have been talking about this, one difference that we have been talking about lately is, on the one hand, committees are more beholden to or micromanaged by consistory or governing board. Consistory says do this and they do it, and so on and so forth. Or they'll take decisions and send it back, no, try this instead, that sort of thing. Whereas on the other hand, teams are a little more self-governed and they ultimately hold themselves accountable to the core values of the church. So, micromanaged versus core values. So, one natural question that has come up is, okay, what are our core values? What are the core values of Grace United Church of Christ to which all of these teams are meant to hold themselves accountable to, by which they measure their decisions and so on and so forth? What are those? And each of us may be able to name what they are or what we wish they were, and you'll have more opportunities to do that as this series continues. But the question remains, what are they? And an even more fundamental question than that is, how do we even begin to list them out? How do we begin to think about them? And what's the point? What's the point of naming such core values? Wouldn't it just be enough if we just have worship and have Sunday school, have some stuff for the kids to do? I mean, that's what a church does, right? What core values help us think about the larger purpose of why we do what we do and why we are who we are. So how do we think about that? There's a memoir that came out last year called When Breath Becomes Air. And it is written by Paul Kalanithi. He was a young neurosurgeon. And the book is divided into two parts. The first part is about Paul's rising through the ranks, as it were. All of his experiences in medical school and his planning to graduate and his time as an intern, his time as a resident, and some of the things that he learns along the way. And he is really catching the eye of a lot of people. He is doing very well for himself. He's earning all sorts of appreciation and accolades, and he during this gets married, and he is just really, he is ready. He will be able to go wherever he wants after graduation. And so he is preparing for this. And then he's diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And so the second half of the book is how dramatically his life changes. And all of the decisions that he has to make, all of the ways, all the different ways, everything that seems to fall away, all of the unimportant things that seem to fall away after this diagnosis, and the plan that he comes up with his family, and of course certainly the grief that he and his family feel during this process. And so it's all about this preparation and this process and moving through this second part of his life. And as he meets with his physician to go over the treatment plan that he will undergo, the one thing, the one refrain that his doctor tells him over and over and over again is, find your values. As we move through this process, find your values. Define for yourself what is most important to you, no matter what else. What do you most want to do for as long as you can? And so he is able to do this. He is able to talk this over and think this over for himself and with his family. And it is those values that guide all of his decision-making and everything that he and his family do through this journey. Finding those values are what helps him do that. Now, thankfully, we are not in a context here talking about values where we have to deal with that kind of a scenario. We are dealing with something else. But nevertheless, to find our values, to define our values, is to say, this is what we as a church are about, and this is what we are about when we are faced with various decisions related to our life together. And it may not seem like it, but there are core values all over this passage from Luke. It doesn't seem immediately apparent, and really that's part of the point. But they nevertheless underlie everything that Jesus does and says in this passage. We start out where Jesus, we are told, has set his face toward Jerusalem. That is where he wants to go. That he has this resolve, this staunch resolve. He is going toward Jerusalem. He is anticipating the events that will happen once he gets there. And that is his mission, and that is his primary purpose. That is where he is going, no matter what. But of course, along the way, he needs to stop and rest for an hour. And so he sends a couple disciples into to a nearby Samaritan village. It's the nearest place. And so he says, here, go find us some lodging here. And it's significant in and of itself that he would send them into a Samaritan village. To put it very, very mildly, Jewish believers and Samaritans didn't like each other. Again, very mildly. They had very sharp differences in culture, and they had very sharp differences in beliefs. And they really made it a point to stay away from one another as much as possible. But Jesus doesn't care. Jesus isn't paying attention to those traditional divisions. He's not paying attention to those traditional boundaries. He is guided by something else. And so he says, no, go check it out. Go see if there's a place for us to stay. And the disciples go on ahead and can almost see it coming. They come back and they report they have been rejected. They can't stay there. The Samaritan village is saying, no, move on down the road. And James and John, in response, have an idea. They come up to Jesus and they say, hey, can we rain down fire on them? Can we? Come on, just let us do a little smiting. Come on, this is how we've read these stories. Let's go ahead and just take care of this right now. And Jesus rebukes them. Says, no, that is not what we are about. That is not how we handle things. That is not how we approach things. Haven't you been paying attention to me at all? And just as quickly, it seems the matter is dropped. And they do move on. And they stay someplace else. And then there is this series of small conversations where one after another Jesus calls to different people, come and follow me, come and be my disciple. But one after another, they all have things they have to do first. The first one says, well, I'll follow you wherever you go. And Jesus says, well, guess what? That's not always going to guarantee you a nice place to sleep. Following me is above comfort. It's not going to mean comfort all of the time. To others he says, follow me, but they have other things to do. Let me go off in grief first, or let me say goodbye to my family. Jesus, again, he has his face set toward Jerusalem. He's on the move. He has things to do. He has a mission. He says, I don't have time for that. Follow me or don't. I have places to go, and I have things to do. Come and follow me or stay behind. We see core values all over this. First, Jesus' mission. First and foremost, it guides him. It is his primary objective. I am going toward Jerusalem no matter what. And then there is this not paying attention to traditional divisions among people, these artificial divisions that we create for one another. He doesn't care. He'll stay in a Samaritan village. He'll be among people who are different from him. And then there is this little episode with James and John. James and John wanting to enact vengeance, wanting to act violent retribution among people who have rejected him. And Jesus says, no, that's not how we do it. And then there is this call to follow. Despite discomfort, despite distraction, above all else, Jesus calls over and over, follow me. These are some of the values that Jesus exhibits and embodies and teaches to his disciples both then and now. Been gone a couple weeks. Maybe you noticed. Maybe not. That's fine. And but had a good time on vacation, relaxing. relaxing time out on the beach for a week. But during the course of that time, Orlando happened. And like many others, I felt grief, sadness, and shock, and anger. I thought first and foremost about so many friends who live in constant fear of a similar thing happening to them because of who they are. And so these emotions that many of us felt in the aftermath of that, they're legitimate. That first and foremost must be acknowledged. They are legitimate feelings that we must acknowledge and that we are meant to process, to name for ourselves and perhaps for others as well. But then comes the question, particularly for people of faith, how do we respond? How are we meant, as disciples of Jesus, to respond to something like this? And part of the answer is to look beyond those immediate, raw emotions that we feel. Maybe there are some things that we would like to do out of those emotions. And we see that happen with James and John in this passage. They have an immediate reaction to what happens when the Samaritan village rejects them. And they have an immediate reaction, they have an immediate solution to what needs to happen. But the question for us, the larger question for us for something like that is, what larger core values can we return to beyond those immediate raw emotions so that we can formulate a faithful response, a response that is faithful, that is perhaps also more thoughtful. And certainly there were many churches that did this. Churches who organized vigils, churches who opened their doors saying, come and grieve here. Come, you have a safe place here to be with others and to try to make sense of this with others. And certainly many statements condemning acts of violence like this. And the reasons they did these things was because they had these core values to which they could turn that could help direct and guide what they were meant to do and how they were meant to faithfully respond as disciples of Christ. We are also called to seek out those things, those core things that guide us, that guide who we are meant to be. That is what core values do. They help us define for ourselves what we are and what we are not. And what we are about and what we are called to do and what we are not about and what we are not called to do, even if our emotions, even if those immediate emotions would be eased if we took this other path of action. Jesus instead, just as he says to James and John, just as he calls to others, Jesus also calls to us to stop and to think, to reflect, to pray, and to find our values.